My name is Claire, and at my mother's 60th birthday dinner, I was publicly erased. In front of the 12 guests seated at the candlelit mahogany table, my mother gestured toward me with a hand bearing her Cartier Trinity ring. "And this is Claire," she announced to her friends, her voice a practiced, silken thing, our youngest, still trying to find her path. The sound of a knife scraping a plate was suddenly deafening, but I did not flinch. Holding her gaze from the far end of the table, I let a slow smile form, a smile that didn't reach my eyes, and replied with 4 words that froze the room. "I'm where I need to be." What no one in that room understood, least of all her, was that this performance was the last of its kind. What happened next is what I am here to tell. Our family operated not like a unit, but like a small, fiercely competitive corporation, and my father was its first CEO. The currency was achievement, but only a specific kind. My brother Mark was the designated successor from birth. His report cards, even with their solid B+s, were framed. His participation trophies from junior golf tournaments were displayed on the mantelpiece, right next to a signed photograph of my father with a minor European royal. I remember the day I won the statewide mathematics prize at 16. I came home with a plaque and a small check for $500. My father glanced at it, said, "Good, Claire, numbers are useful," and then immediately turned to Mark, who had just arrived, to discuss the summer internship he had arranged for him at a friend's brokerage firm. The plaque was never displayed. I cashed the check and deposited it into a savings account my grandmother, Helen, had opened for me years before. It was the first of many deposits I would make in silence. My mother was the firm's head of public relations. Her role was to manage appearances, and any deviation from the corporate narrative was a threat to be managed. That narrative was simple. Mark was the brilliant future, and I was the quiet, perplexing footnote. Birthday parties were master classes in this dynamic. For Mark's 18th, the garden was filled with 200 guests, a string quartet, and a caterer who normally served political fundraisers. For my 18th 6 months later, it was a joint celebration with a distant cousin I barely knew, held in the smaller family room. My mother explained it was simply more efficient. I remember watching her circulate, her hand resting for a moment on Mark's shoulder as she laughed with a guest, her posture a billboard of maternal pride. She never looked in my direction. I was seated at a small table by the sliding glass door to the patio, next to the overflow coats. I didn't complain. I had already learned that the most effective way to survive in that house was to become exceptionally good at not needing anything from anyone. Only one person seemed to operate outside this rigid structure. My grandmother, Helen. She was my father's mother, a woman who had built her own textile import business in London after the war, a detail my father rarely mentioned. She visited twice a year. While my mother fluttered and my father boasted, Helen watched. She would sit in the armchair by the window, a cup of Earl Grey tea in her hand, and her gaze would follow me. She never offered easy platitudes or overt affection. Instead, she asked questions no one else did. "What are you reading, Claire? Explain the argument to me. Why did you choose that solution for the equation? Show me your work." During her last visit, a year before she passed away, she found me in the library reviewing her company's annual reports, which she had sent me. She didn't say anything. She just stood in the doorway for a full minute, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded once, a sharp, decisive gesture, and walked away. I didn't understand what that nod meant until I found the letter from her solicitor 2 years ago. Today, I know it was an approval. A transfer of silent command. The date was October 14th, 2018. The air in my father's study smelled of leather and old paper. It had been 3 months since Helen's funeral. The family solicitor, a man named Mr. Davies with a worn leather briefcase, had just finished explaining the particulars of her will. The main assets were straightforwardly distributed. Then he came to a specific provision, a trust fund of $75,000, legally designated for my postgraduate education. My father, polishing his eyeglasses with a silk handkerchief, spoke first. "An MBA, perhaps," he mused, not looking at me. "But the market is volatile. Mark, on the other hand, has an immediate opportunity." My brother, seated in the wingback chair opposite my father, shifted. He had the grace of someone accustomed to being rescued. "It's a sound venture, Dad. A tech startup. High risk. High reward." My mother placed her hand on my father's arm. "Helen would have wanted to support the family's most promising venture," she said, her voice a soft, reasonable murmur. "It's not a gift to Mark. It's an investment for all of us. Claire understands practicality." I didn't speak. I watched a sliver of afternoon light catch the face of my father's Audemars Piguet watch, as he rested his hand on the mahogany desk. I catalogued the faint tremor in my mother's fingers as she smoothed a non-existent crease in her skirt. Mark was studying the intricate pattern of the Persian rug, avoiding my eyes. They weren't asking for my permission. They were informing me of a decision already made. The solicitor, sensing the tide had turned, cleared his throat. The trust's language is quite specific about the educational purpose, he began, but my father cut him off with a placid wave of his hand. A formality, Davies. We are the executors. We will interpret the intent. I finally looked up, my gaze moving from my mother to my father to my brother. I said nothing. My silence was not assent. It was a recording. I memorized the exact angle of the light, the sound of the grandfather clock ticking in the hall, the quiet confidence in their voices as they repurposed my future. It was 3:42 p.m. I stood up. My chair made no sound on the thick carpet. Thank you for the clarification, I said to no one in particular. I walked out of the study, my back straight, my steps measured. I did not go to my room and cry. I went to my room and packed one suitcase. I took the clothes I had bought with my own money, the books Helen had sent me, and the bank book for the account she had opened for me 2 decades prior. It contained $17,450.12, an accumulation of every birthday check and the prize money from a forgotten math competition. I walked down the grand staircase, past the portraits of ancestors I no longer claimed, and out the heavy oak door. I did not look back. I took a taxi to the Greenwich train station and bought a one-way ticket to Grand Central. As the train pulled away, watching the manicured lawns blur into the gray of the evening, I made a silent promise. I would not fight them. I would not expose them. I would simply become what Helen always knew I was, and I would let the truth do its own work in its own time. My new life had begun. My first year in New York was a lesson in brutal efficiency. I found a 5th-floor walk-up in the East Village, a space so small I could touch both the kitchenette counter and my bed at the same time. The radiator hissed and clanked with the temperament of a dying animal, a constant soundtrack to my new life. I secured an entry-level position as a research assistant at a small investment firm, a job that mostly consisted of fetching coffee, organizing files, and proofreading reports written by men a decade younger than me who wore Brooks Brothers suits and spoke of their summer homes in the Hamptons. I worked 16-hour days. I ate instant noodles and day-old bread from a bakery down the street. I never called home. I never checked their social media. I severed the limb to save the body. What I didn't know then was that my isolation was being monitored from afar, not by my family, but by a legal firm in London operating on a set of instructions written 5 years prior. Just as my meager savings account dwindled to its last $300, a registered letter arrived from a British solicitor I'd never heard of. It felt impossibly heavy. Inside, there was no sympathy card, no flowery prose. There was a single-page letter from Helen, dated 6 months before her death, and a legal document. Her letter was concise. Claire, it began, by the time you read this, your father will have likely revealed his nature. He is a weak man who confuses inheritance with achievement. This is not a rescue. It is an enablement of your own capabilities. The document detailed the existence of a second, entirely separate trust she had established. The Phoenix Fund, with a capital of £50,000. It was not for education. The single-line purpose clause stated it was for the establishment of an independent life. The transfer was contingent on a single condition, that I provide proof of zero contact with my family for a period of 18 consecutive months. I had met the condition without even knowing it existed. That £50,000, which converted to just over $62,000, was not a cushion. It was ammunition. I did not move to a better apartment. I did not buy new clothes. I enrolled in the Chartered Financial Analyst program, a brutal series of 3 exams known for their punishingly low pass rates. My life contracted into a singular, monastic focus: work from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., study from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m., sleep, and repeat. I lived on caffeine and the cold fire of Helen's final instruction. The money bled out in a controlled hemorrhage to pay for exam fees, study materials, and the bare minimum of sustenance required to keep my brain functioning. While my former peers were getting married and putting down payments on suburban homes, I was in a fluorescent-lit library, memorizing option pricing models and the intricacies of corporate governance. It was a calculated, solitary war, waged in silence against the future my family had tried to write for me. The only person I was accountable to was a dead woman who had seen me more clearly than anyone alive. 3 years later, I was no longer an assistant. With the CFA charter in hand, I was hired as a senior analyst at Argentus Capital, a boutique advisory firm known for its aggressive, data-driven strategies. My office on the 42nd floor had a view of the Hudson River. My starting salary was $185,000, a number that felt both obscene and entirely earned. I specialized in forensic analysis of underperforming family-run conglomerates, peeling back layers of sentimental tradition and nepotism to find the rot underneath. My reports were known for their clinical precision and their complete lack of deference to a company's founding mythology. I was good at it because I understood the language of these private kingdoms. I knew where they buried the bodies because I had grown up in the cemetery. My reputation grew. I was the one they called when a situation required not just a financial model, but an autopsy. The project that changed everything landed on my desk on a Tuesday morning in late September. It was our firm's largest new client in 5 years. A sprawling, privately held East Coast real estate and logistics empire named Markham Holdings. They were old money, second generation, and their portfolio was bleeding value. The founding patriarch, my boss explained, was a brilliant but rigid operator who had failed to adapt to the new market. His son, the heir apparent, was rumored to be more interested in yachting than spreadsheets. My job was to conduct a full top-to-bottom analysis of their entire operation and deliver a restructuring plan that would either save them or provide the basis for a strategic breakup. I was given a team of 3 and a 6-week deadline. The name meant nothing to me. At the time, it was just another file, another dysfunctional dynasty. But what I was about to uncover was far more than just bad investments. I worked with a chilling intensity, even for me. For 4 weeks, my team and I delved into every corner of Markham Holdings. I found bloated executive salaries for family members in do-nothing jobs, disastrous acquisitions driven by ego, and a pattern of diverting capital from profitable divisions to prop up the son's failing vanity projects. The company was a patient slowly dying from 1,000 self-inflicted cuts. My final report was 84 pages long, a brutal, undeniable indictment of mismanagement. It recommended liquidating 2 entire divisions and removing the son from any operational role. My managing partner, a man named David Chen, read it and simply said, "This is a masterpiece of devastation, Claire." He scheduled the final presentation call with the CEO for the following Monday at 9 a.m. sharp. As I did my final preparations that morning, David called me. "He's on the line," he said. "Remember? He's a legend, but he's pragmatic. Just stick to the numbers. Good luck." I took a breath, opened the video link, and a familiar face appeared on my screen. It was my father. The invitation arrived not as a request, but as a summons. A thick, cream-colored cardstock with embossed lettering announcing my mother's 60th birthday celebration, an intimate dinner at the Greenwich House. For 2 years, since the Markham Holdings presentation, my communication with my father had been non-existent, a void of mutual agreement. With my mother and brother, it had been a carefully curated exchange of superficial holiday texts. I had no desire to go, yet I knew my absence would be woven into a narrative of my failure, a story of the difficult daughter who couldn't even show up for her mother. I accepted. I went not for her, but for myself. I needed to see them one last time in their native habitat, to confirm the data I had collected over a lifetime. It was a final, dispassionate field observation before closing the study for good. I booked a late train back to the city for 11:59 p.m. I would not be staying the night. The house was exactly as I remembered, a monument to curated success. The scent of lilies and beeswax hung in the air. My mother greeted me at the door, dressed in a navy blue Lanvin dress that probably cost more than my first car. Her hug was brief, air on either side of my head, her hands patting my back as if dusting off a piece of furniture. "Claire, you made it," she said, her voice carrying a note of mild surprise. She immediately turned to greet a couple arriving behind me, the wife of a hedge fund manager, enveloping her in a genuine, warm embrace. I was left standing in the marble foyer, a silent observer of my own peripheral status. Mark was already there, holding a glass of champagne, laughing with one of my mother's friends. He saw me, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and turned back to his conversation. It was a familiar choreography, a dance of priorities I had watched my entire life. Dinner was served at the grand mahogany table, set for 12. I was placed at the far end, next to an elderly cousin of my mother's who was hard of hearing, and closest to the swinging door of the kitchen. The conversation eddied around me, a predictable current of wealth and influence, the merits of St. Bart's versus Mustique for the holidays, the difficulty of getting a good crew for the yacht this season, the outrageous price of a particular Jackson Pollock that had just sold at Sotheby's. I ate my seared scallops in silence, my posture perfect, my face a neutral mask. I listened to the specific cadence of their speech, the easy confidence of people who had never been told no, the soft laughter that punctuated stories of trivial inconveniences presented as major life challenges. They were characters in a play they didn't know they were in, and I was the only one with a copy of the script. My mother, at the head of the table, was in her element. She was performing the role of the gracious, resilient matriarch, a woman undeterred by her husband's recent, unfortunate business restructuring. She never mentioned my father by name, but his ghost was a guest at the table, a subject of quiet, sympathetic glances. She pivoted the conversation deftly to Mark. "Mark has been an absolute rock," she announced, her hand gesturing down the table toward him. "He's just launched the most fascinating new venture, a bespoke travel consultancy. It's all about creating unique, curated experiences. He's already secured his first round of seed funding. We're all so incredibly proud of his vision." I saw Mark preen, accepting the murmurs of admiration. I knew, from a discreet inquiry I had made the week before, that the seed funding was the last $75,000 from a secondary mortgage she had taken out on the house. The performance was flawless. After a suitable interval of praise for Mark, one of the friends, a woman named Carol with diamonds on her wrist that caught the candlelight, turned her professionally maintained face towards me. "And Claire, dear," she said, her voice dripping with polite condescension, "we never hear what you're up to, tucked away in the city. Are you still with that little bank?" The question, framed as interest, was a weapon. It was designed to highlight my perceived obscurity, to paint me as a footnote in the grand family saga. The table went quiet. All eyes swiveled to me. The sound of a knife scraping a plate was suddenly deafening. My mother prepared to intervene, to deliver the pre-rehearsed line that would smooth over the awkwardness of my existence. I saw the slight intake of her breath, the practiced tilt of her head. I was a problem to be managed, a loose thread in the family tapestry. It was then that she delivered the line I had heard in variations my entire life, but which, on this night, landed with the force of a final judgment. She gave a small, indulgent laugh, as if sharing a charming family secret. She gestured towards me with a hand bearing her Cartier Trinity ring, a gesture of dismissive presentation. "And this is Claire," she announced to the table, her voice a silken, practiced thing. "Our youngest, still trying to find her path." There it was, the public erasure, the casual assassination of my life, my work, my entire being, reduced to a state of aimless wandering. The decade of struggle, the 16-hour days, the brutal CFA exams, the office on the 42nd floor, the respect I had carved out of nothing, all of it vanished in a single, elegantly delivered sentence. In that moment, something inside me did not break, but rather clicked into place. It was the final, satisfying tumbler in a complex lock. The years of silent observation, of recording every slight, every dismissal, every casual cruelty, had not been a sign of weakness. They had been the methodical process of building a case. The radiator in my East Village apartment, the taste of stale bread, the weight of Helen's study guides, the 84-page report on Markham Holdings. It was all evidence. This was not a new wound. It was the confirmation of an old one, the final signature on an affidavit that had been drafted over 30 years. The noise in the room faded to a low hum. I saw everything with absolute, crystalline clarity. The precise arrangement of the flowers, the way the light reflected off the silver, the faint, almost invisible tremor in my mother's smile. I did not flinch. I did not look down. I held her gaze from across the vast expanse of the mahogany table. I let the silence stretch, forcing the other guests to sit with the weight of what she had said. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the distant hum of the Sub-Zero refrigerator from the kitchen. I then allowed a small, slow smile to form on my lips, a smile that I knew did not reach my eyes. It was not a smile of warmth or forgiveness. It was a smile of finality, a smile that said, "The recording is over." I picked up my water glass, the crystal cool against my fingers, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The performance of the quiet, accommodating daughter was officially concluded. This was the last time I would ever be in this room. My voice, when I finally spoke, was even and calm, carrying to the head of the table without any effort. "I'm exactly where I need to be," I said, my gaze still locked on my mother's. I watched the flicker of confusion in her eyes, the momentary disruption of her social poise. She did not understand the words, She only registered the tone. It was the tone of an equal, and it was entirely foreign to her. The conversation around the table stuttered back to life, awkward and forced. My mother's friend Carol began a rambling story about her trip to a spa in Arizona, but I was no longer listening. I was thinking of the email I would send from my phone in the back of the Uber on the way to the station. It would be sent to a solicitor in London. It would contain a single word. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I ate my dessert, a lemon tart with a perfectly browned Italian meringue, with the detached appreciation of a food critic. I excused myself at precisely 11:15 p.m., citing the need to catch my train. My mother, having recovered her equilibrium, saw me to the door. "So good of you to come, Claire," she said, the earlier moment already reframed in her mind as a minor success. I looked at her, at the woman who had authored my life's primary narrative of inadequacy, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a profound and peaceful sense of an ending. As I stepped out into the cool October night, I didn't look back. The legal process, set in motion by a dead woman 2 years prior, was about to reach its quiet, inevitable conclusion. The truth was on its way. 2 weeks after my mother's birthday dinner, on a bright Saturday morning, the post arrived at the Greenwich house. My mother was hosting a small brunch on the patio for the same circle of friends. I can picture the scene perfectly. The white linen tablecloth, the mimosas in their tall flutes, the murmur of conversation about art auctions and summer travel plans. My mother, at the center of it all, would have been radiant. The story of my brief, awkward visit likely already spun into an amusing anecdote about the eccentricities of her youngest child. She was the queen in her court, secure in her narrative. The housekeeper would have brought the mail out on a small silver tray, placing it beside my mother's plate. Among the invitations and catalogs was a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the crest of a London law firm. It looked important, official, an artifact from a world she believed she controlled. She would have picked it up with a theatrical sigh, a small performance for her friends. More tedious estate paperwork, I'm sure, she might have said, a way of reminding them of her responsibilities, of the weight of her inheritance. Mark, seated beside her, would have leaned in with casual interest. This was part of their shared reality, the management of family wealth. She would slit the envelope open with the butter knife from her plate, an act of casual dominance. There was no sense of dread, no premonition. Why would there be? In her world, letters from solicitors were confirmations of her status, not challenges to it. She unfolded the single sheet of heavy, watermarked paper, her eyes scanning the first few lines with the practiced ease of someone who signs documents without reading them. The pleasant, brunch table smile was still fixed on her face. Then, the change. It would have started in her eyes. A sudden stillness, a loss of focus. Her smile would not have vanished at once, but rather, frozen on her face, becoming a grotesque mask of its former self. The legal language, dense and unforgiving, would have been a foreign country. Words like breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of trust assets, and violation of testamentary intent would have registered not as concepts, but as blows. The letter, with the cold precision only lawyers and undertakers can muster, detailed the existence of the $75,000 trust fund, citing the exact clause from Helen's will that specified its use for my postgraduate education. It then presented the undeniable paper trail, the date of the fund's liquidation, and the corresponding transfer into an account controlled by my brother, Mark. There was no room for interpretation. The color would have drained from her face, leaving a pale, waxy sheen under her expensive foundation. The hand holding the letter would have begun to tremble. A microscopic vibration that would have been invisible to anyone but a daughter who had spent a lifetime studying her for signs of weakness. Mark, noticing the shift, would have leaned over to read the page, his own expression morphing from curiosity to a dawning, sickly horror. The letter was not an accusation. It was a verdict, delivered from beyond the grave. Helen's foresight, which my mother had dismissed as eccentricity, was now revealed as a perfectly constructed trap, designed not to wound, but to simply present the truth in a form that could not be spun, denied, or reframed. The brunch conversation around them would have faltered, the silence spreading outward from the head of the table like a stain. And then came the consequence, the part Helen had crafted with such devastating foresight. The letter was a formal demand, not for the return of the money to me, but for its full repayment, with compound interest calculated at the prevailing Bank of England rate since October 14th, 2018. to be donated to a scholarship fund for underprivileged students at the London School of Economics. The total came to $94,217.58. A copy of the letter, it noted, had been forwarded to the primary executor of Helen's estate, Mr. Davies, for his records. It also noted that a courtesy copy was being sent to the full board of the Children's Literacy Foundation, the prominent Greenwich charity on which my mother had served as chair for the last decade, a position that was the cornerstone of her public identity. The silence on the patio became absolute. It was no longer a conversational lull. It was a vacuum. Carol, the friend with the diamond bracelet, developed a sudden, intense interest in the pattern on her teacup. Another friend began a frantic search for her phone in her handbag. They were not my mother's friends. They were witnesses. They had been present for the performance of my inadequacy, and now they were present for the irrefutable, documented proof of her corruption. My brother, his face ashen, understood instantly. This was not about money. It was about the complete destruction of the family's public narrative. The story of the brilliant heir and the aimless daughter was revealed for what it was, a fiction financed by a crime. He was not the promising venture. He was the bad debt that had just bankrupted his mother's reputation. My mother did not cry. She did not shout. With a strange, unnerving calm, she folded the letter along its original creases, her movements stiff and robotic. She slid it back into the envelope. She looked up, not at her son, but at the faces of the friends who were now refusing to meet her gaze. Her entire life had been a meticulously curated exhibition of flawless respectability. In the space of 90 seconds, a dead woman and a piece of paper had dismantled it completely. She was no longer the matriarch of a powerful family. She was a thief, exposed in her own home, in front of her own court. The carefully constructed world of appearances had shattered, and the reality, cold and sharp, was all that remained. Justice had arrived, not with a bang, but with the quiet rustle of paper. The first report I received was not from a family member, but from a former colleague who now ran a high-end catering service in Fairfield County. She texted me the Monday after the brunch. "Heard your mother's party broke up early. Everything okay?" The text was a piece of social sonar, a probe sent into the depths to measure the damage. I didn't reply. I knew the story was already spreading, passed in hushed tones over tennis lessons and at the country club bar. The official version would be vague, a sudden illness, a family emergency, but the truth would travel along a parallel, more efficient network. The network of whispers that builds and destroys reputations in places like Greenwich. My mother's carefully tended garden of public perception was withering. The call from the Children's Literacy Foundation came on Wednesday. I learned later, from a board member's disgruntled husband I had a professional connection with, that the board meeting was short and brutal. My mother was not given the option to explain. The evidence, a copy of the letter sent to their general counsel, was absolute. They asked for her immediate resignation as chair. There was no discussion of her decade of service, no acknowledgement of the funds she had raised. Her position, the very cornerstone of her social identity, was surgically removed. It was not a punishment. It was a liability calculation. The foundation could not be associated with financial impropriety, however personal. Her name was removed from their website by the end of the day. My brother, Mark, was the first to attempt contact. He sent a single text message at 2:17 a.m. on the Tuesday after the brunch. "You destroyed her." The message was a perfect distillation of his worldview. It contained no apology, no acknowledgement of the theft. In his narrative, he and my mother were the victims, and my silence, my refusal to continue absorbing their sins, was the act of aggression. The $75,000 he had taken was a footnote. The public exposure of that fact was the crime. I read the message, the blue light of the phone illuminating my dark apartment, and I felt nothing. It was like reading a data point that confirmed a hypothesis. I deleted the text without responding. My mother tried a different tactic. She called me the following Saturday, her voice unnaturally bright, as if nothing had happened. "Claire, darling, I was thinking of you. I found that old recipe for your grandmother's scones. I thought I'd send it to you." It was a breathtaking performance of denial. She was attempting to rewind the clock, to reestablish the old dynamic where she was the benevolent mother and I was the grateful child. She was testing the waters, seeing if the entire affair could be smoothed over, forgotten, absorbed into the family mythology as just another misunderstanding. I let her speak, her cheerful monologue filling the silence. When she finally paused, waiting for my reply, I said one thing. Was the letter unclear? The line went dead. The 94,000, $217.58 was a concrete problem that could not be solved with denial. I learned from a junior analyst at my firm, whose father was a private wealth manager in Greenwich, that my mother was forced to sell a small but significant painting, a Mary Cassatt sketch that had hung in the main hallway. The sale was done discreetly through a private dealer, but it was still a concession. It was a crack in the facade of effortless wealth. The money wasn't just sitting in an account, ready to be deployed. It was tied up in the performance of being rich. The painting's absence on the wall would be a constant, silent reminder of the cost of their choices, a blank space where their honor used to hang. A second wave of social fallout began a week later. An invitation to a prominent charity gala, an event my mother had co-chaired for the last 5 years, was rescinded. The official reason given was a printing error that had resulted in over-inviting. My mother, a master of social nuance, would have understood the brutal message. She was no longer a draw. Her name on a committee was now a risk, not an asset. The women who had once vied for a spot at her table now crossed the street to avoid her. Her social world, which had seemed as solid and permanent as the oak trees lining her street, was proving to be a fragile ecosystem, highly sensitive to the poison of public disgrace. Mark's situation deteriorated in parallel. The bespoke travel consultancy he had founded with my stolen inheritance evaporated. The seed money, which had been propping up his expensive lifestyle rather than building a business, was gone. He was forced to give up his apartment in Soho and move back into the Greenwich house. At 34 years old, the designated heir, the brilliant successor, was sleeping in his childhood bedroom. His friends, men who had flocked to him when he was paying for the table service, suddenly had other plans. His currency had been his father's reputation and his mother's money. With both devalued, he was insolvent. Then came the most unexpected communication, an email from my father. It arrived 3 weeks after the brunch, a block of text without a salutation or a closing. He did not mention the money, my mother, or my brother. He wrote about Markham Holdings. He acknowledged that the restructuring plan I had authored, the one that had cost him his company, had been correct. He said the 2 divisions I recommended liquidating had been a drain for a decade, but he had kept them for sentimental reasons. He wrote, "You saw the board for what it was, not what I wanted it to be. Your analysis was without emotion. It was clean." It was the closest he had ever come to an apology, and the closest he would ever get to admitting his own failure. I did not respond to my father's email. It was not an opening for a conversation. It was a confession delivered to an empty room. His approval, which I had once craved with a desperation that felt like a physical hunger, was now irrelevant. I had spent my life seeking his validation, only to discover that I never needed it. My success was not built on his permission, but on its absence. His belated recognition was like a letter arriving at an address I no longer lived at. It was a historical document, a relic from a past that no longer had any power over me. The work I did on his company was not for him. It was for me. It was proof that I could see the truth, even when he couldn't. The repayment to the London School of Economics Scholarship Fund was confirmed by a letter from Helen's solicitor, Mr. Finch. He wrote to me directly, a courtesy not required by his duties. He informed me that the funds had been received in full. He then added a personal note. "Your grandmother would be proud," he wrote. "She always said that the most effective form of justice is a well-drafted document." Coming from a man who communicated only in legal formalities, the sentiment was profound. It was a final message from Helen, a confirmation that her plan, executed across years and from beyond the grave, had been a success. The debt was paid, not to me, but to the future. My mother made one final attempt at control. She sent a package to my office. Inside was a photo album, filled with pictures of me as a child. Me on a swing set, me at my 4th birthday party, me on the first day of school. There was a sticky note on the cover. "We were a family once. Don't forget that." It was a clumsy, desperate attempt at emotional blackmail, a final appeal to a sentiment I no longer possessed. I looked at the photos of the smiling, eager to please little girl, and I felt a pang, not of nostalgia, but of pity. I had a duty to her, to that child who had been taught that her value was conditional. That duty was not to forgive her abusers, but to honor the life she never had a chance to live. I took the photo album, walked to the shredder in the corner of my office, and fed it page by page into the machine. The noise was loud, a grinding, mechanical sound of destruction. It was the sound of the past being rendered into meaningless strips of paper. I was not destroying memories. I was destroying a narrative. The narrative that my childhood had been idyllic, that their neglect was a form of love, that I owed them my loyalty. That little girl in the photos deserved better. She deserved a future free from the weight of their expectations, their disappointments, and their crimes. This act was for her. It was the final, necessary act of severing the chain. The months that followed were quiet. The torrent of communication from my family slowed to a trickle, then stopped. The silence was not awkward. It was clean. It was the sound of a space that had been cleared of debris. I continued my work at Argentis Capital. I took on more complex projects. My reputation for clinical precision now solidified. I traveled. I bought a small apartment in a pre-war building on the Upper West Side, one with high ceilings and a view of the park. I started running in the mornings. My life, which had once been a reaction to my family, was now simply my own. The change was not dramatic. It was gradual, like the turning of a season. One evening, my managing partner, David Chen, invited me for a drink. We were celebrating the successful closure of a difficult merger. He raised his glass. "To Claire," he said, "the woman who can find the rot in any balance sheet." He then grew more serious. "I knew your father, you know. Met him a few times at conferences. He was a titan, but he couldn't see what was right in front of him." I looked at him, my expression neutral. "It happens," I said. It was a test. I wanted to see if he would press, if he would try to pry open the door to my past. He just nodded, accepting my boundary. "Well," he said, "his loss was our gain." In that moment, I realized I had built something new, a world where my value was not debated, but assumed. I learned through the grapevine that my brother Mark had finally gotten a job. He was selling high-end real estate in Florida. It was a role that suited him, one that relied on charm and the projection of wealth. The irony was that he was now selling the dream that our family had once embodied, a dream that he himself had helped to dismantle. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if reading about a character in a novel. His life was his own story now, and it no longer intersected with mine. His success or failure was irrelevant to me. He was just a man I used to know, a ghost from a different life. My mother, I heard, had downsized. She sold the Greenwich house, its grand rooms and manicured lawns now too large and too empty for her diminished social life. She moved to a smaller condominium in a less fashionable part of town. She had become what she had always feared, a woman of a certain age, with a past that was more impressive than her present. The queen had been exiled from her own court, left to preside over a kingdom of memories and regrets. Her power had been derived from a reflection she saw in the eyes of others. When those eyes turned away, she discovered she had no power of her own. The new owners of the Greenwich house, I was told, were a young tech couple from California. They had gutted the interior, replacing the heavy mahogany and silk drapes with glass, steel, and minimalist furniture. They painted the walls white. They had no interest in the history of the house, in the family portraits that had once lined the halls. They were building their own world, their own narrative. It was a fitting end, the house. A monument to my family's carefully constructed fiction had been wiped clean, its memory erased, its history rendered irrelevant. It was now just a structure, beautiful but empty of its former meaning. I never spoke to my mother again. I never spoke to my brother again. My father sent me a Christmas card once, a generic, store-bought card with a pre-printed signature. I threw it away unopened. Some might call this cold. Some might call it unforgiving. I call it a consequence. It was the natural result of their actions. I did not seek revenge. I did not wish them ill. I simply removed myself from the equation. My presence had been essential to their performance, the quiet, accommodating daughter who absorbed their cruelty and validated their narrative. Without me, the play could not go on. The curtain had fallen. My life became my own. The energy I had once spent navigating their complex emotional minefield was now mine to invest as I saw fit. I poured it into my work, my friendships, my health. I learned to cook. I took up pottery, finding a strange satisfaction in creating something tangible and real with my own hands. My world, which had once been so small, so defined by the walls of that house, expanded. I was no longer a character in their story. I was the author of my own. The emptiness I had once felt was replaced not by joy, but by a profound and lasting sense of peace. The most significant change was internal. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety that had been the soundtrack to my life for as long as I could remember simply faded away. I had spent decades trying to earn my place at a table where I was never truly welcome. The moment I stopped trying, the moment I walked away and built my own table, was the moment I found my freedom. My strength was not in fighting them. It was in my ability to observe, to document, and ultimately, to become indifferent. Indifference, I learned, is a power that cruelty cannot touch. Sometimes, when I am reviewing a company's financials, I see a familiar pattern. A struggling division propped up for sentimental reasons, an unqualified family member in a senior role, a pattern of small, seemingly insignificant transfers of funds that, when added up, reveal a story of slow, creeping decay. In these moments, I feel a connection not to the perpetrators, but to the truth hidden in the numbers. My past did not break me. It trained me. It gave me a language to understand the world, a lens through which to see the hidden machinery of power, ego, and deceit. It was a brutal education, but it was a thorough one. I have found that justice is rarely a single, dramatic event. It is not a courtroom verdict or a public shaming. It is a process. It is the slow, methodical accumulation of consequences. It is the social invitations that stop arriving, the friends who no longer call, the sale of a beloved painting to cover a secret debt. It is the quiet, undeniable erosion of a carefully constructed world. My family was not destroyed by a single letter. They were destroyed by the weight of their own actions, a debt that had been accumulating for 30 years and had finally come due. The story of what happened is not something I share. It is not an anecdote I tell at dinner parties. It is a private knowledge, a quiet understanding that I carry with me. It is the foundation upon which I have built my new life. It is a reminder that the truth, no matter how long it is buried, will always find its way to the surface, and that the most powerful thing you can do is to be the person who is standing there, ready to receive it, when it does. My name is Claire, and I am exactly where I need to be. Have you ever had a moment where the truth finally did its own work? A moment where you didn't have to fight, you just had to wait for reality to catch up? It's a quiet, powerful experience, the feeling of a debt being settled by the universe itself. These moments define us, not by the noise they make, but by the silence that follows. They are the turning points where we stop being a character in someone else's story and start writing our own. Your story might be different, but I suspect the feeling is the same. I'd be interested to hear about it. This process of detachment wasn't about forgiveness. Forgiveness is a word often used to pressure victims into absolving their abusers, to smooth things over for the comfort of others. My journey was about something else entirely: accountability. It was about allowing the consequences of their actions to land where they belonged, without my intervention, without my protection. By stepping aside, I was not being cruel. I was allowing reality to be itself. This distinction is the core of my new strength. It is a quiet, unshakable foundation, built not on anger, but on the simple, clean lines of cause and effect. I sometimes wonder what Helen would think. I believe she would approve. She was a woman who understood that the world is governed by numbers, by contracts, by the cold, hard logic of assets and liabilities. She knew that sentiment is a luxury that people like my father could not afford, and that people like me could not rely on. Her final gift to me was not the money. It was a lesson in this unforgiving arithmetic. She gave me the tools, not to fight, but to calculate, and then she trusted me to do the math. The final sum was justice. People often misunderstand what it means to be strong. They think it means to fight back, to shout, to demand retribution. But sometimes, strength is in the silence. It is in the ability to absorb a blow without flinching, to observe without reacting, to wait without losing hope. It is the strength of a foundation that can withstand a storm because it is built on the bedrock of truth. My family's house was built on sand, on a fiction of their own making. When the tide of reality finally came in, it was washed away. I remained. My relationship with money changed. It was no longer a tool for survival, a measure of my worth, or a weapon to be used against me. It became what it is, a form of energy, a resource to be managed, invested, and deployed with precision and purpose. I treated my own finances with the same clinical detachment I brought to my clients' portfolios. I built my own security, my own independence, not as a defense against my past, but as a platform for my future. I was no longer a liability in someone else's ledger. I was my own asset. The greatest victory was not seeing them fall. It was realizing I didn't care if they stood up again. Their fate, which had once been so intertwined with my own, was now a matter of complete and total indifference to me. Their successes would not diminish me, and their failures would not elevate me. This, I learned, is the true meaning of freedom. It is not the absence of an oppressor, but the absence of the need for their validation or their demise. It is the quiet, unshakable knowledge of your own sovereignty. My story is not a tragedy. It is a story about the quiet power of no longer participating in a narrative that does not serve you. It is about the freedom that comes from letting go, not of the anger, but of the hope that they will ever change. If this resonates with you, if you have ever felt like a footnote in your own life, know that there is a path forward. It is not a path of revenge, but of release, and I have more to share about how to walk it. The next step is about building a new world, not just leaving the old one behind. My apartment on the Upper West Side overlooks the park. There's a single armchair by the window, a well-worn leather one I bought from a vintage shop downtown. This is where I drink my coffee every morning. From a heavy ceramic mug made by a potter in Vermont. There is no fine china here. There are no silver trays. The only sounds are the distant hum of city traffic and the occasional rustle of the newspaper I still prefer to read in print. Sometimes, I look at the skyline, at the sheer, impossible geometry of it all, and I think of the mahogany table in Greenwich. I see it not with anger, but with the detached curiosity of an archaeologist examining a relic from a dead civilization. The most valuable thing in this room is not the art on the walls or the balance in my bank account. It is the silence, a silence that is not empty, but full. It is the sound of my own life. I still find the rot for a living. I peel back the layers of dysfunctional companies and expose the truth hidden in their ledgers. My past was not an injury. It was a training program. My father taught me the language of corporate pride. My mother taught me the art of the public fiction. And my brother taught me the simple mechanics of theft. Helen, however, taught me the most important lesson, that the most devastating weapon is a well-documented fact. I am good at my job because I grew up in the boardroom of a failing family. I see the patterns because I have lived them. But the pain is gone. It has been replaced by a clean, cold clarity, a skill set, divorced from the emotion that created it. It is the final, most useful inheritance. The world is not changed by grand gestures of revenge. It is changed by the quiet, methodical work of people who are willing to see things as they are. Justice, I have learned, is not a firestorm. It is a rising tide. It erodes the foundations of a house built on lies, slowly, silently, until the entire structure collapses under its own weight. You do not have to light the match. You just have to have the courage to stop holding up the walls. The strength you are looking for is not in the confrontation you imagine, but in the observation you have been making your entire life. Your silence was never weakness. It was the gathering of evidence. That little girl in the photo album, the one who wanted so desperately to be seen, is not gone. I carry her with me, but I am no longer her protector. She is my compass. She reminds me of the value of a life lived in truth. My story is not about winning a war against my family. It is about signing a peace treaty with myself. The rest was just an accounting adjustment. For those of you who have navigated your own silent wars, who have felt the ground shift under your feet when a long-hidden truth finally came to light, I ask you this: what was the first quiet moment after the storm? And what did you build in that silence?